All right.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and start. Looks like it's setting up the webinar.
Okay, can you message me when it's live, Christian?
I want to talk to you real fast about a credit building app called Pickup. So they'll set you up. You just pay a few bucks a month.
Good afternoon to the East Coast and good morning to the West Coast. I'm so excited to welcome you all to Bazelon Center's annual Olmstead versus LC or Lois Curtis anniversary event. My name is Jalyn Radziminski, and I'm the Director of Engagements at the Bazelon Center for Mental Health Law, and I attend law school as an evening student at Fordham Law. For a quick image description, I am a light-skinned Black Japanese disabled person with long dark brown curly hair, and today we are here to honor the life and legacy of our now ancestor, Lois Curtis, and continue the fight for a future of community-based and led services for our community, especially our Black disability community. And I'm honored to be able to create and share this space with all of you. And I'm really blown away that there are over 330 of you here and more tuning into the live stream as we speak. And like Lois, this event means a lot to me. This space means a lot to me because I too am a survivor of involuntarily being institutionalized in Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm still living my experience with mental health and other disabilities every day. And to me, Lois Curtis means freedom, liberation, and autonomy. And it not only means daring to dream, but to have the audacity to fight for our human rights, to have access to the necessary accommodations and mental services while being integrated in our communities, while simultaneously fighting for the future of ending incarceration and institutionalization of Black people and our entire disability community. Her legacy means embracing joy, every tear, and every moment of love that comes with our ongoing fight for freedom. I never had the honor of meeting Lois Curtis myself, but I wanted to do my best to ensure people knew her name and also understand how special she is and should forever be for all of us. And today I'm coming to you live from the Bazelon Center in Washington, D.C., and behind me is actually Lois Curtis's art. So we're really grateful to have that today, and we wanted to thank Mary for allowing us to bring these pieces and bring her into this space with us. And, you know, after her victory in this precedent case, Lois Curtis continued to lead a life as an artist, selling her artwork, and she enjoyed doing self-portraits, portraits of other people, and flowers. And I'm also excited to be here with you all today to join this discussion because as someone who works at the Bazelon Center, I understand how important it is to dare to dream of a better future and propose solutions for and by us with disabilities before solutions often exist. And from being one of the first public interest organizations as the Mental Health Law Project, the Bazelon Center advocated to stop horrid conditions of institutions like Willowbrook in the 1970s. And after advocating to get people out of these type of institutions, the Bazelon Center continued to fight for plaintiffs like Lois and Elaine Wilson through law and policy. And at the Bazelon Center, we understand that the solution today is not just creating more beds. It's not just making institutions more comfortable. It's a continued fight to support, to give community supports and accommodations so people like myself and many others can stay in the community, even when there are times when the models we dream of don't exist or are unprecedented. As we continue this fight for integration and inclusion in the United States, I also thought it would be good to share as we celebrate today that this is a global human rights issue for people around the world, from the United States to Ukraine, Colombia, Guatemala, Mexico, Ghana, and more. People with psychosocial disabilities and the disability community at large are still fighting for our choice and voice to have the rights to live in community outside of institutions, to end forced labor in institutions, to have sexual and reproductive rights, to be able to vote, and so much more. And as the Vice President of the United Nations Committee for the Rights of People with Disabilities herself stated a few weeks ago, there's multiple articles of human rights conventions that are being violated by these issues. And indeed, this is a global and intersectional issue. This continuous fight takes all of us. Like our current audience today, mostly from the United States, reflects people in the Department of Justice, legal and policy advocates, people with disabilities, people with lived experiences, members of Congress, students, and more. It takes all of us to fight for our human rights, for mental health services, and integration in the community. And with that being said, I wanted to show you all a short teaser trailer of a documentary project I've been working on to capture Lois Curtis's life and history of this momentous day 24 years ago, as well as a better path forward. And through this project, I wanted to amplify other fellow Black women and Brown advocates that are fighting for a better, more inclusive future today. And after the narration of this video, you'll hear from speakers like Carrie Gray, the leader and founder of the Named Advocates, Karis Myrick, the vice president of partnerships at Inseparable, and the podcast and host creator of Unapologetically Black Unicorns, and Vesper Moore, Bazelon Center board member and COO of Kiva Centers.
1995, aspiring artist Lois Curtis was confined to a state-run institution in Atlanta, Georgia. Curtis was not alone. Thousands of people with disabilities were confined to state institutions. The women argued their right to live in integrated communities fully funded, and won.
Lois Curtis, to me, represents our need and our fight for bodily autonomy. What I respect about her legacy is her fight. She fought for her bodily autonomy and she won. And what I love about her is that she won not just for herself, but for the many of us who have come after her.
So for me as a brown disabled person, Lois Curtis's legacy, Olmstead, is symbolic of ideas of freedom and liberation that are important for disabled people, that are important for brown and black disabled people. That legacy and what that means is that we can live lives in the community just as any other person would.
As a Black disabled and psychiatric survivor, a person with a psychiatric disability, this means so much to me because so often things have been forced upon me without my choice, without my voice. And when I think about Lois and what she did, using her voice, being able to talk about the importance of choice, community inclusion, being a part of and developing a community that is for and by her with the supports that she needed, I know that I can speak up and do that as well.
Thank you. I admire all these people very much and am grateful for all that they do for our community. And I would also like to thank our board member, Sarah Kenningsberg, for helping produce this short trailer. This is just a teaser. So please feel free to join in on this. If you would like to share anything about Lois Curtis's life or your dreams of a better future of better integration and inclusion of our communities, please feel free to email us at communications@bazelon.org. And with that, I'm super excited to introduce our first featured speaker and our newest member of the Bazelon team. Megan Schuller just joined the Bazelon Center as our legal director only 6 or 7 weeks ago and she joined us after working at the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. And for the sake of time, I'm not going to read all of her credentials, but please check out our website for that because she's amazing. And I did want to speak really quickly on her character that I've already seen in such a short time. So Megan is fiercely dedicated to this work and jumped right in to help us strategize to tackle these issues of overcriminalization and institutionalization of our communities that we'll be discussing today, as well as many topics beyond what we're going to talk about today. And in addition to her passion and expertise in these areas, I personally admire her leadership style, which is full of empathy, energy, and integrity. And as a full-time Bazelon employee and a law student at night, I often joke that I'm on the Bazelon Center curriculum every day, and I learn from the best in the country. So in addition to Ira Burnham, our now senior counsel, and Louis Bossing, our senior staff attorney, I'm grateful I get to learn each and every day from Megan too now. So with that, I am excited to bring to our stage our new legal director, Megan Schuller.
Thank you so much, Jalyn. Jalyn told me that she wouldn't show me her remarks before today, so I would be surprised. And now you're setting me up to be overwhelmed with emotion from that incredibly kind introduction. Welcome, everyone. As Jalyn said, I am Megan Schuller, the legal director of the Bazelon Center. I use she, her pronouns. I am a white woman with formerly blonde, shoulder-length hair, who I believe qualifies as middle-aged, and I'm wearing a blue sweater. Over 50 years, the Bazelon Center has won landmark cases empowering people with mental disabilities and securing the community-based services they need to have meaningful choices about where and how to live their lives. We led the fight to expand the civil rights movement to include a focus on people with mental and other disabilities. We helped secure passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and we work every day to realize its promise that people with disabilities be treated as equal members of our society. And we continue to support innovative mental health legislation, some of which you will hear about today. We could not do this work without our partners, donors, and our incredible board of trustees, who I have had the privilege of getting to know, led by our board chair, Eve Hill of Brown, Goldstein, and Levy. They bring different perspectives and expertise to our work. They include people with lived experience, and they fight for what we do here at Bazelon. We also certainly couldn't do this work without the tireless efforts of our expert staff, who have deep roots in the civil rights, disability justice, and mental health communities. I am so honored to join them in this work. Before departing the Department of Justice, I told Jennifer Mathis that I have the Bazelon Center up on a pedestal. Now, having seen behind the curtain, that is truer today than it ever was before. This team is a force to be reckoned with, and the reckoning is coming. People with mental health conditions, especially those with severe conditions, face discrimination, poverty, too few treatment resources, and over-policing and over-incarceration, among other challenges. They are too often silenced, ignored, and marginalized, but not today. Today, you will hear from people who identify as peers and individuals with lived experience. They will speak the truth that needs to be said, which is what we at the Bazelon Center strive to do every day, and call upon you all to join our voices. Together, we will be heard. Today, you will hear about the future of what we often refer to as Olmstead. But let me pause right there. Tommy Olmstead, the former commissioner of the Georgia Department of Human Resources, was the named defendant in a historic US Supreme Court case decided 24 years ago today. In arguably the most important disability rights decision of our time, the Supreme Court held that unnecessary institutionalization and segregation of people with mental disabilities in hospitals and other facilities is a form of disability discrimination banned by the Americans with Disabilities Act. The court declared that unnecessary institutional placement of people with disabilities perpetuates unwarranted assumptions that persons so isolated are incapable or unworthy of participating in community life. Mr. Olmstead lost that case. The heroes of the story were Lois Curtis and Elaine Wilson, two women from Georgia with mental health and intellectual disabilities who were approved to get services in their community, wanted to get services and live in their community, but could not because the services they needed were not available. We are here today to talk about the future of community integration for people with mental disabilities. I'm to talk about the life and legacy of Lois Curtis, who passed away this fall. When we refer to the future of Olmstead, we are effectively erasing her role and legacy in fighting for and securing the right to community-based services for countless people with disabilities like her. Well, once again, I say, not today. Lois Curtis will always have a space and a voice here. Lois Curtis was a person with a disability. She was also a Black woman. That intersectional identity created roadblocks she should not have faced, shaped her life story and her legal case in countless ways, and is critical to our discussion today. Ira Burnham, my predecessor and now senior counsel, has said that our goals here at the Bazelon Center are pretty simple. Kids should grow up in families and have access to a meaningful education. People should be able to stay in their own homes and get services in their communities. People need jobs, just like people who don't have disabilities. That's what we're fighting for. And let me tell you, these days we are fighting for our lives. People with mental health disabilities are increasingly at risk from encounters with police. The results of those encounters are too often deadly, especially when the person with a mental health condition is Black. Medical emergencies get a healthcare response, but when it is a mental health emergency, law enforcement is generally the first and only response dispatched. Mental health disabilities are criminalized. Although people with a serious mental health condition comprise only 4 to 5% of the US population, they make up about 15% of the prison and 20% of the jail populations. Not because they are more violent, not because they engage in more criminal behavior, simply because of their disability. Millions of people with mental health conditions are booked into jails each year. Millions. One study found that Black people with mental health conditions are more likely to be incarcerated than any other racial group. If you want to talk about a national crisis, this is it. And if we are going to talk about the future of our work fighting for full inclusion and against institutionalization, we need to be talking even more about the criminalization of mental health and the millions of people with mental disabilities, especially Black and brown people with mental disabilities, who are being held in jails and prisons instead of getting community-based services. But we also need to be talking about solutions. Now, let me be clear, those solutions do not involve more hospital beds. We need to end the cycle of mental health crises leading to hospitalization or incarceration. How do we do that? By providing a robust array of intensive community-based services for adults with mental disabilities. And this is not a new idea. These services, including housing-related services, supported employment, peer support services, and mobile crisis services, have long been proven to help individuals with disabilities live successfully in their own homes and communities. And they can be funded through Medicaid. They also help states comply with their legal obligations and save taxpayer dollars that would otherwise pay for costly institutional care. Both the Bazelon Center and the US Department of Justice have been fighting for states to fulfill their obligations under the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Olmstead v. LC, Lois Curtis, holding for years. This year alone, the Justice Department has won victories in court securing the rights of children with mental disabilities to live in their homes with their families in Florida, and made historic findings about constitutional and civil rights violations by law enforcement in Louisville and Minneapolis, including against people with behavioral health disabilities. Now, among the champions of this work, from the Bazelon Center to the Justice Department, is our first keynote speaker today. She needs no introduction, as her work and accomplishments for people with disabilities across decades speak for themselves. She is the former Director of Policy and Legal Advocacy at the Bazelon Center and current Deputy Assistant Attorney General at the U.S. Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. I have had the honor of working with her in my former position at the Justice Department, and the benefit of standing on the shoulders of giants as we carry on her legacy here at the Bazelon Center. Please welcome Jennifer Mathis.
Hi, thank you so much, Megan. I'm not sure about the shoulders of giants, but I am delighted to be here today. I use she, her pronouns. I am a white woman with short hair of kind of indeterminate color, somewhere between brown and blonde. And I am wearing a gray suit and a pink shirt. So I am so thrilled to be here with the Bazelon Center as we mark the 24th anniversary of the Olmstead decision, or as Megan points out, the Lois Curtis decision, a decision that has made an enormous impact and enormous difference in the lives of so many thousands of people with disabilities across the country. It was starting in January of 1999 that as a young lawyer at the Bazelon Center, I had the opportunity to work on the Olmstead case, helping to coordinate the strategy and briefing when the case was being heard by the Supreme Court. The Bazelon Center played a central role in the strategy and presentation of the case. When the court issued its decision holding that needless institutionalization is a form of discrimination under the ADA, the disability community celebrated, as that decision confirmed a principle that legal advocates had been working for decades to establish. That integration principle really gets to the core of disability discrimination. When people with disabilities are isolated and segregated from the mainstream of society, it limits every aspect of their lives, and most of all, it affects how society views and treats them. Olmstead recognized that needless segregation is discrimination, not just because it takes away everyday freedoms and choices, as well as social and educational and employment opportunities, but also because it changes how people with disabilities are looked at by others, how capable they are assumed to be, and what kinds of lives people assume they should lead. One of the most striking insights of the Olmstead decision was the court's statement, and Megan read this statement before, and I'm going to repeat it because it bears repeating, that unnecessarily confining people in institutions perpetuates unwarranted assumptions that they are incapable or unworthy of participating in community life. That observation is one that we see borne out time and again. People across the spectrum of society make unfounded assumptions that because someone has been institutionalized, that person is incapable of living an ordinary life, having a job, living in their own place, having people to love, having friends and neighbors, having fun, and belonging to a community. It is remarkably challenging to undo all of those layers of assumptions. So what followed in the years since the Olmstead decision has been a long journey of implementation and enforcement. While progress has been slower than many of us would like, the decision has brought tremendous change in the goals that are set for people with disabilities in service systems, in employment, in schools, and in other contexts. And many tens of thousands of adults and children with disabilities have been able to live transformed lives, leaving segregated settings and gaining autonomy, dignity, and choice. Just as many others have received the services they need to avoid being admitted to an institution or other segregated setting in the first place, whether a psychiatric hospital, a nursing home, an institution for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, a board and care facility, a sheltered workshop, or another segregated setting. Despite those advances, we still have a very long way to go to achieve the promise of Olmstead. 24 years in, far too many people with disabilities remain isolated and segregated without necessity in living settings, in schools, and in day and employment settings. And far too many are needlessly caught up in the criminal justice system because of how it is deployed to respond to people with disabilities in lieu of providing services. Yet, even as we work to eradicate these barriers, the power of the integration mandate and the Olmstead decision allow us to think about integration in new ways and see new opportunities for progress. In the last couple of years, disability rights advocates, as well as the Justice Department, have begun to use the integration mandate to address the all too common situations where failure to provide community services results not only in institutionalization, but also in preventable law enforcement encounters and needless incarceration, leading many people to cycle between the street, the emergency room, the psychiatric hospital, and the jail. For example, in Alameda County, the Bazelon Center, along with Disability Rights California, the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund, and a private law firm, filed a lawsuit challenging the county's failure to provide needed community services, placing people with psychiatric disabilities at repeated and serious risk of institutionalization in the county's psychiatric hospital and emergency department, and incarceration in the county jail. And in 2021, the Justice Department issued a findings letter concluding that there was reasonable cause to believe the county violated the integration mandate by failing to provide community services to people with mental health disabilities, leading to their unnecessary institutionalization and incarceration. Negotiations to resolve those claims continues. And meanwhile, the Justice Department is currently pursuing Olmstead investigations in Kentucky and Oklahoma, looking at whether the failure to provide community-based services places people with mental health disabilities at serious risk of unnecessary hospitalization and avoidable law enforcement encounters. Such law enforcement encounters can lead to trauma, injury, institutionalization, incarceration, and sometimes even death. And many of these encounters could be prevented if mental health services were available to people. Our law enforcement systems were not meant to be used as a substitute for offering disability services, and it serves no one well to use them that way. The Justice Department's Kentucky Olmstead investigation relates to another ADA matter that Megan mentioned, where the Justice Department issued findings that the Louisville Metro government and the Louisville Metro Police Department violated the ADA by relying primarily on law enforcement responses to calls involving people with behavioral health disabilities, when often a police response was not warranted, and a mobile crisis team or other response would have been appropriate. The department's Oklahoma Olmstead investigation relates to a pending investigation of Oklahoma City, similar to the Louisville matter. Both states and localities play an important role in ensuring that people with psychiatric disabilities receive the services and assistance they need rather than being treated as criminals. One of the broader lessons of Olmstead is that how we label people has a big impact on how we treat them, even if the label is arbitrary. We need to examine the system we have in place to respond to people based on a psychiatric label, because when we look closely, some of those responses may not make sense. But if they've been in place for a long time, it's often very hard for people to see that. Lois Curtis once was asked what she wanted for all of the people with disabilities who transitioned from institutions to communities. And she famously said, "I hope they live long lives and have their own place. I hope they make money. I hope they learn every day. I hope they meet new people, celebrate their birthdays, write letters, clean up, go to friends' houses and drink coffee. I hope they have a good breakfast every day, call people on the phone, feel safe." That quote captures so well the vision of the Olmstead decision and the integration mandate. The Justice Department will continue to pursue vigorous enforcement of the decision, and I know that disability rights and disability justice advocates will continue to do so as well, until people with disabilities can have the same kinds of lives as people without disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, just for joining us today. And we're always so grateful to see you and for all of your advocacy. So thank you. And thank you for sharing that beautiful quote from Lois herself. So our next speaker will be Neli Latson. And a little bit about Neli is that Neli is an autistic self-advocate whose terrible experiences in the Virginia criminal legal system and racial profiling in a police encounter brought national attention to the intersection of race, disability, and criminal justice. His experience happened in 2010 when he was 18 years old as a high school student. And this was prior to the Black Lives Matter movement, before the world knew the names of Trayvon Martin, Sandra Bland, and George Floyd. With the support of his mother and the ARC, Neli fought for his freedom and now uses his experience to illuminate systematic problems in national conversations and advocates in the federal and state government to have mental health support services instead of policing people with disabilities. And after transforming laws in Virginia, Neli now lives independently in Florida with Medicaid home and community-based service waiver. And with that, I'm also pleased to say that Neli and I became friends earlier this year at the White House Young Black Disability Leader Roundtable. So Neli, I'm so excited I get to see you again. And my question for you to kick off this next section of the program is, I know you've worked so hard to raise awareness nationally about the mistreatment of our community, Black people, and our disability community, in police responses and in mental systems long before this was a popular topic. Can you share why this is so important?
I think it is important because I am just one person who had their life hijacked by an interaction with police. There are so many other stories that don't get told. Often these stories are not spoken about from the perspective of the person with a disability, and these incidents aren't addressed, but instead are just thrown under the rug like these are normal occurrences. In 2010, when I was an 18-year-old high school student, just a week away from graduating, my life was hijacked. One morning I was waiting outside the public library for it to open, and I was racially profiled. Someone thought it looked suspicious and called the police. The police officer who came to investigate searched me because the 911 caller had said something about a gun. Of course I didn't have a gun. I've never had a gun, ever. I was at the library for the same reason anyone goes to the library. I went to the library all the time. I showed the officer that I didn't have any weapon, but he kept asking me for my name. When I didn't give him my name, he said he was going to arrest me, and he pushed me against a car and he physically restrained me. Like a lot of autistic people, I am very sensitive to being touched, especially if I'm not expecting to be touched. I have what is called a fight or flight reaction, and that's what happened that day. When the police officer restrained me, I didn't think, I just reacted. I fought back, and I'm a strong person. I injured the police officer. I regret that. I'm sorry I hurt him, and I have apologized to the officer. I spent several years in jail and prison. Most of the time I was locked up, I was held in solitary confinement. Due to my autism, I had trouble with the rules, and I got punished for that. This is a common thing that happens to people with disabilities in jail and prison. Anyway, regardless of the reason I was in solitary, it was torture, just torture. Thanks to my mom, Lisa Guthrie, I was eventually able to get a pardon for release. She spread awareness around the country and elevated my case to a national and at times international level. I owe her my life. Looking back, it always baffled me why I was in jail. I never expected that for my life. It didn't have to happen that way. The officer kept aggressing and escalating things when he should have been the one de-escalating things. If a person questions why they are being stopped, that should not be a signal to the police for them to do whatever they want to. It is a violation of a person's humanity, and it should not happen. He treated me like an outsider. He treated me like an enemy. He should have treated me like a neighbor and tried to understand what I was doing there. Tried to listen to me to know I was just waiting for the library to open. If he listened and approached me differently, it could have all been different. What I hope now is that things can change. We're in an age of awakening now. Many people are being exposed to what is happening, and people in positions of power are becoming aware of the implications of police interactions with people with disabilities, and particularly Black people with disabilities. The stakes are high. You could lose your life. I want to have an impact. I want a better way to create unity. I hope that one day people are just better to each other. Recently, I thought about something that happened in school. I grew up near Fort Benning, Georgia, and I remember an exercise my teacher did with us to teach us about racism. First, the Black students were given the good seats, and the white kids were told to sit in the bad seats. Then it was reversed to show us how racism plays out in life. Afterward, I told my teacher that I didn't think that happened that way in life. And she said, "You'll see." I really wish she hadn't been right. I know now it is ingrained in our systems, now know that it is ingrained in our systems and our society. So very powerful now to look back on what she said to me. I was too young to understand how things really were. It is not for the weak of heart to be labeled or to be a Black person in this country. My hope is that this curse of my experience can be a call to action for change in public policy so that others do not experience what I did. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Neli. I'm just grateful for you to know you and honestly your impact on the world. So I'm so glad you were able to join us today. And with that, I wanted to call up some other advocates to join a discussion. I think Neli laid out the issue that we're addressing today very well. And I wanted to make sure that his voice is heard, as well as some other amazing Black women that are joining us today. Carlean Ponder and Leslie Napper. Carlean and Leslie are incredible advocates. I look up to them. I won't read their bio. Look them up after this event too. And Neli as well. They're all incredible people. And I'm just excited to get this discussion going because I know we have a lot to talk about. So hi, Carlean. Hi, Leslie.
Hello, hello.
Well, I'm excited to have you both today here. And just so everyone knows, this isn't scripted. We just wanted to have a candid conversation to talk about the issues. So I'll keep an eye on the Q&A as we chat, but let's just get into it. So to kick us off, I thought it'd be good. Neli already laid out the problem. Carlean, I know you published an amazing article and gave an incredible speech to the Department of Justice earlier this year on issues surrounding law enforcement response and the necessity of non-police responders. And I guess, can you just kick us off to talk about why and how we should be doing more to cherish Black disabled life?
Absolutely, everybody. Carlean Ponder, she, her pronouns. I got a afro today and big glasses on. And I just want to say, Neli, it's always a pleasure to be in the room with you. It really is. And thanks so much, Jalyn, for focusing this event on Lois Curtis. You know, as an attorney, when we refer to cases, when it comes to the disability rights world, I've always heard Olmstead, but it was so good to learn about the woman who was behind the decision and who really is the reason why we've come so far in terms of working on community integration. So I myself, I have what we call an episodic disability. I have chronic fatigue syndrome, which at times causes a profound impact on me physically, but also cognitively on occasion. And so I have a long history in disability work. I worked for the Social Security Administration for 10 years in disability legal work. And then the intersection of race and disability and criminal justice came into focus with me as a community activist in 2018. I live in a community that describes itself as very progressive. We are indeed racially diverse, high education levels, et cetera, et cetera. And as I was watching a lot of the national news coverage about police shootings, it just so happens that I came back home from a conference one day and looked in the paper and saw that we had had a shooting of an unarmed Black man literally in my community, like blocks away from where I live. And it was muted. You know, there was no national news coverage about this. Very little information was available. And I started to call around to local government offices to find what happened, you know, because what we had was the police account, which was, you know, there was an altercation and a man was shot. He attacked police officers. Well, there was a lot more to it. The man's name is Robert White. Robert lived with schizophrenia and he lived on his own for many, many years in the community, which says a lot. The fact that he was capable of living on his own in the community tells you that this was, you know, somebody who was fairly, you know, a fairly stable person. And he was Black. I hope I said he was Black. And the police officer just happened to be in the neighborhood that day for a different reason and saw Robert and decided to stop him. And, you know, ostensibly that's because he saw a Black man walking down the street. So he stopped a Black man. But then he also noticed some things about Robert that he thought were suspicious. The way he walked, his gait, you know, the way his arms moved, the way he was dressed. He later talked about there was a hole, you know, in his clothing. Really, really sort of innocuous and actually silly things this officer pointed out. And it was on the basis, to me, it was on the basis of Robert having a mental health disability. This officer thought it was suspicious, the way he talked, the way he moved, the way he dressed, etc. Robert asked to be left alone so that he can continue his walk. And unfortunately, this officer did what police are prone to doing. He escalated this situation. He pulled his gun out. And he pursued Robert, even knowing that he was dealing with somebody who had some form of, you know, cognitive impairment. And Robert, you know, got fed up and acted, you know, out of his disability and pushed the officer, and the officer responded by shooting Robert multiple times. That is how an activist organization came to be formed, known as the Silver Spring Justice Coalition. I'm a founder in that organization and helped lead it for several years. And it's because we were outraged, you know, that this happened in our community. And at that time, it was also when police accounts were pretty much the narrative, you know, that you saw in the media. And so a big part of what we were able to do and have been able to do as an activist group is to actually say there's more to the story. Have you considered that this altercation didn't need to happen to begin with? It just didn't need to happen. And it was, you know, it was really good to see some of the newer investigations and reports coming out of the Department of Justice, those that are now focusing on that overuse of police in cases like this, you know, with Robert White's encounter. Once the officer became, well, first he shouldn't have stopped him, but once he became aware that he was dealing with somebody with a cognitive disability, if he was so insistent that Robert needed to be questioned, why didn't he request appropriate services? We do have crisis services in the county. Well, part of it is because they're inadequate. And the other thing is there's no mandate. Officers don't have to do that. It's up to their discretion. And so those are some of the issues that as a disability justice advocate, I am hoping to change.
Thank you so much, Carlean. You have me thinking about so much, just as someone who's a law student and someone who does a lot with press and media. It's so far too often that these narratives get distorted to erase what is really happening. I remember in class reading about wearing a hoodie is a reason to stop for probable cause in some areas, and it's quite disturbing. And you mentioned disability justice, so I wanted to bring Leslie up here too, because I know we've been chatting about disability and racial justice, and also how it's not reflected in our legal and policy systems. So I just kind of wanted to ask if you could share some more too, building off of Carlean's point, how you're bridging that gap in high impact litigation, as well as just your everyday interactions as a peer advocate?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you so much, Jalyn, and congratulations to Bazelon on 50 years of service. Looking forward to the next 50. My name is Leslie Napper. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a Black woman. I identify as a peer in mental health, and I have a brown face, brown skin. I'm wearing black rimmed glasses. I have a headset on, and I work from home. So in the background, you'll see various home decor. Thank you so much for your question. Wow, Neli, always good to, I mean, you're just so amazing. And Carlean, honored to be in this space with you. When I think about Lois Curtis, I just want to just spend a little time to talk about Lois Curtis for a moment, please, because people like me living with serious mental illness have the right to participate like everyone else, learning, working, socializing, recreating, participating, et cetera, in ways that enrich our lives, thriving in the communities where we live. For me, with the NAPR, Disability Rights California, I'm a senior advocate with our mental health practice group. And Disability Rights California had a case, NAPR versus Sacramento County. And it was the Sacramento County wanted to shut down our outpatient provision, which I relied on, right? So I was in a locked facility, didn't understand it. I went to the ER because I was feeling ill. I didn't know what was going on. And it resulted in a 5150, ended up in a locked facility, didn't understand what the hell I did wrong to end up in with something that was as close to jail that I ever wanted to get in. But ended up with the outpatient provider. And there I was connected with services, and I was blessed to be connected with a service coordinator and a peer advocate that looked like me. They were Black. Excuse me, a ESL interpreter for speaking fast, a little nervous. Bless you. And so because I absolutely did not want to go back to that locked facility, these outpatient provisions, these community-based voluntary outpatient, were really important to me and to many thousands like me. And we didn't know how to advocate for ourselves at the time. I knew about the consumer movement, but I didn't really see a reflection of myself in that until I saw a picture of Lois Curtis. Advocating for herself and others empowered me. And I saw for the first time a Black woman like me with mental illness standing up and speaking before the powers that be for what she believed would work best for her wellness and recovery journey. And that was to live in the least restricted integrated setting so she can participate as a community member. Lois modeled to me what advocacy looked like. Lois embodied the mantra of nothing about us without us. And it inspired me to say yes to becoming the lead plaintiff in the Disability Rights NAPR v. Sacramento case. I have not stopped advocating for the rights of people living with mental illness alongside with my colleagues at Disability Rights and other organizations such as Bazelon. American with Disabilities Act is one, and Olmstead is one of the tenets of our mental health practice group's advocacy. So when we talk about racial justice and disability justice, in California, we have such things as care court and some policy things that are taking us backwards in our disability and consumer movements, what Lois fought for. There are names of people who are there, like Karis Myrick now we see, right? We have Vanessa, we have Jalyn, we have Neli, we have Vanessa R, we have Oscar Lopez, we have so many others, we have Vespers, we have Leslie, right? And so, but there are others, yet still we have voices that are missing, Jalyn. And so like the Black and brown voice, we need to hear more of us to change this narrative. So when I think about, because our voices really matter, but there's nothing about us without us. Your voice matters. You matter. We are the legacy of Lois Curtis. Nothing about us without us. I want to hear from you. Please share your story with me. Please contact me because we really think it's really that important. When I need to call on strength and continue the fight for the good fight, disability rights and racial justice disparities that we see, or these racial disparities within disability justice work, there's so much that's happening. I want to share something that my colleague, Linda Bird, shared with me, and I thought it was really important. The touchstone of Olmstead is segregation. It can also occur in institutions, in school settings, in housing, in service provisions resulting in needless institutionalization, setting people apart. Olmstead is part of the lessened the disability rights movement, learned from the civil rights movement addressing racial disparities. I identify as a Black person living with a mental health disability. You cannot separate me from my identity. Therefore, you cannot ignore the unnecessary discrimination and disparate treatment I receive or experience as a Black person seeking or needing mental health services. That's why within our work at Disability Rights California, within our mental health practice group, we work hard to lift up the voices of members that are directly impacted, living with serious mental illness, unhoused, justice involved, dually diagnosed with substance use or co-occurring disability, gender nonconforming, of color, all these dots, right? All of our intersectional identities. Yes, there are limitations to the law, Jalyn, but we fight for services to be community-based in the least restrictive environments, whole person care, and prioritize engaging with community, establishing strategic partnerships so that our work reflects what the directly impacted community members as defined as appropriate and culturally responsive mental health services so that we can thrive in the community and to achieve the success through our wellness and recovery journey. I said a lot, so I hope I answered your question and just gave you a little bit more about why I'm really excited to be a part of Lois Curtis's legacy. Thank you.
I'm really glad you said that, because I think for me, Lois Curtis also means a lot of hope. And you both, in our conversations prior and today, spoke a lot about the importance of Black women and Black disabled women being leaders in, legal and policy space, and leaders of like community-based centered service spaces. And I'd love to dig into that more because, some people can say, an organization can say they're culturally competent, right? But I remember when I got out of an institution, my spirit was broken in Georgia. And for years, I was trying to figure out, I come from a prison abolition background from undergrad. And I was like, well, this is incarceral. Where are the Black people in this space? Who do I look for? And Lois Curtis was also, like Leslie, the first Black woman, not only with a disability, but a mental health disability too. And I'm sure, as y'all know, disabilities that aren't always visible or mental health aren't always, seen as a disability. So I just kind of wanted to unpack more about how important that that intersectional leadership is, because it's one thing to say it, it's a different thing to do it, but then it's even, I don't want to say a bonus. I feel like it should be more Black women and Black disabled people in these leadership roles, from advocacy to support. So I'd love to just hear what are your thoughts on what have you been working on to help push for that more?
I'm happy to start, Leslie, if you don't mind. And this kind of gets into, I co-authored an article with amazing Black disabled activist Ola Ojewumi recently that was published by News One, which is a Black publication, which is also important because stories about us get published. And so we were really talking about the murder of Jordan Neli in New York City on a subway train. And that is, again, where that disability justice framework comes into play. What we're talking about is a little bit different from traditional disability rights, because we're saying you actually have to look at other societal issues that profoundly impact Black and Brown disabled people in these communities. And so when we're talking about Jordan Neli and so many others, we are talking about that intersection of racism, policing, and disability. Jordan Neli was choked to death by a man on a subway train just, I think, a couple of months ago. This man was not a police officer, but if you ask me as an activist in the community, he's certainly taking his cues from what we have seen police officers do to Black people in the community. I mean, it was very similar to what happened to George Floyd. As I understand it, Mr. Neli was held in a chokehold for about 15 minutes on a subway train until his organs gave out. And the disability piece came in because this man said that, you know, Neli was acting bizarrely, right? He was shouting, saying things that were not pleasant, or some people construed as threatening, but he hadn't harmed anybody. He hadn't touched anybody. I don't think there was any indication that he necessarily was going to do that. I've certainly been in public spaces with people who are acting out of their disability, and I have not felt that I needed to, you know, take some physical force or action against them. I might want to give them space, but I haven't felt that approaching them and physically restraining them was going to be the best thing to do. So in this article, we also talk about how it's important that organizations who are doing this work actually are looking at these issues because, and I'll just read a quote from the article. It says, though Black people are more likely to identify as disabled than their white counterparts, there has been an intentional erasure of their presence in disability representation. In the leadership of mental health advocacy nonprofits, policy think tanks, and organizations, why are they mostly white and non-disabled people? It's due to racism, ableism, and a lack of an intersectional approach to mental health care policy, and it costs lives, like Jordan Neli's. I mean, there were some organizations in the disability rights community who released statements condemning the behavior, but there were many others who were silent on the death of Jordan Neli. And you have to ask why. And when you ask why, take a look at the leadership of these organizations, see who's there, because it may not make their top 3, top 5, or top 10 priorities.
That's real, Carlean, and thank you for that article. It's really impactful. I hope we share it in the link somewhere.
Oh, but, I can put it in.
I think, you know, to your point, I think with our work with Disability Rights California, I mean, you look anywhere, right? You can look at the data, we can see how Black and Brown are overrepresented everywhere we see in carceral spaces or court ordered to this or that, and, you know, involuntary this or that. We just see it. We can see what data we can collect publicly, right? And so, so in our work, there's a reflection of really trying to address those disparities through our disability justice lens. And how do we address that? You're right, Carlean. We don't really hear our voice. I'm trying to make the point we need to hear more of our voices. We have incredible advocates, as we mentioned before, but we need to hear your voices too. And so come out and advocate, because truly nothing about us without us. Implicit bias is real. Structural systemic racism is real. And Disability Rights California is really trying very hard to overcome those pieces. But the law is limited, and we have to be very clear about that. But without the voice and the testimony of the community that look like us, that are most impacted by these egregious laws and legislation and public policy issues, without our voices, then they don't hear us. All they hear is one side or one point of view or one perspective. And so we're saying, lend your voice, right? Share with us, talk with us, call us. And so this is where, you know, how we think about disability justice and the racial justice lens. We cannot overcome it or change the narrative until we come out and lend our voice, just as Lois Curtis did.
And it's really interesting just completing a year of law school, coming from a disability justice perspective, because I know it can be really hard to bridge that gap. And a lot of times our community, especially Black disabled people, don't have access to these services, to you know, legal advocacy. I'm also, you know, I also find that the process of, you know, getting a JD itself isn't accessible. It's often so I very much admire your work, in both of your work in the legal spaces as an attorney and as a peer advocate. As someone who's done both, it can be quite exhausting. You hear very problematic things where we have to protect our spirit. So I'm really grateful y'all are able to share that, and just those perspectives of, I guess, hope and hopefully awareness that we need more. And I see a question in the chat, just to kind of loop in the viewers in this discussion too. We have a question that said, it's well documented that police should not respond to calls involving people with disabilities. I think this was like to the earlier point about some examples like Jordan Neli that Carlean was saying. However, many states are not equipped to provide adequate services. How do we address these areas with limited options? I don't know if either of you want to say that. Yeah.
I think to the point, and part of our work is really just, I think, to your question too, and to the question I hope I answered. Really, community outreach and outreach and community engagement is really important. By prioritizing that in our work, connecting with community members that are directly impacted, building those strategic partnerships, right? Capturing what the community defines as what's appropriate, what's culturally appropriate, what's culturally responsive, community-based services that will help us through our mental health wellness journey and recovery journey. But I think to the question is, there's so many alternatives to what we see now. There's alternatives to 988. We have like mobile crisis units and have a peer or a person with lived experience involved in that. We have crisis residentials. We have, community outpatient provision where people can live in the community, and people need housing. And so I think you're not just no shelter, that's not housing, right? And we need our own space, permanent, supportive housing if we need it, and affordable. And so these are things, so there's so many alternatives. We need more peer-run organizations. We need those, where people can connect with like-minded folks who have experienced a similar journey in the spaces where we live, right? And so I think there's so much that we can do, and would certainly love to connect with you to explore that. And so this is why at Disability Rights California, we do, in a mental practice group, we do prioritize connecting with the community to talk about what alternatives could look like and what it could look like for them, and how can we apply the law to support some of that.
Yeah, and as an activist, I mean, I'm in the weeds on this whole issue of crisis response and not having a police response only option generally to people who are experiencing mental health, behavioral health, unhoused, issues related to our unhoused community neighbors. I'm in the weeds on it, and there's resistance. And I think part of what needs to happen is that we have to do the education to let people know, wait a minute, there could be an alternative to 911 and having armed police show up to do mental health, related work. If community members started to ask for that and to actually demand that, I think that we would see budget priorities shift so that we could fund mobile crisis units who could go out and rapidly deploy, just as people expect police to be able to rapidly deploy and respond to calls. But we've got to have people saying, this is what we want. And then there's habit. Everybody calls 911 because that's the only option we've ever had. And that benefits a police state. It benefits the overuse of police, because they get called to do absolutely everything, whether they're qualified or not. And so that's a habit that we've got to break.
Absolutely. And I love that you two are emphasizing that there are models that exist that just need more awareness, need more funding, because like you all said, like there are alternatives instead of 911, but mainstream people do still call 911. People don't know about, mobile crisis responders. They don't know what peer respites are that are alternatives to institutions. And I'm wondering, because I know we have a wide range of people here, if either of you feel comfortable defining that, because I think defining those type of things, because I think a lot of people just don't know what to do, and they think institutions unfortunately still are the answer when we know it shouldn't be anymore. Can y'all define mobile crisis response and maybe peer respites for the audience?
Well, Leslie, I can take mobile crisis response if you want to do peer respite. Okay, so mobile crisis response, there is a range of what constitutes a mobile crisis response program. One of the programs that I work with a lot in terms of like doing community education is the Denver STAR program. I really like them. So they have two different models, but the STAR program itself, those are mental health professionals who can be dispatched and go out on calls into the community without police assistance unless they themselves deem police assistance is necessary for some reason. And I love them because they are not a like city, governmental unit. They are a separate entity, and so they can do their own training. They can use their own judgment as to when, going out into the community unassisted with police is a good idea, et cetera, versus some other models. The model that we have where I live in Montgomery County, Maryland, we do have mobile crisis teams, but they are part of our county government operation. And it is much more difficult to get some of the people involved in that work comfortable with going out into the community and responding to mental health calls without police assistance. And so, there's a range of what can be done with mobile crisis response. But I think the biggest issue is that wherever they are, the programs are under-resourced, understaffed, and we don't have enough units anywhere in any of these models to be able to go out and meet the demands of the community, and also to be able to do it in a timely fashion. Because I know where I live, one of the refrains that police officers will give very quickly as to why they don't use the mobile crisis units more often is because it just takes too long for them to get to a scene. And that's because we don't have enough resources. And that just goes back to what I was saying earlier about, but if community members showed up at budget hearings and said, I want mobile crisis units to be able to deploy, that would change.
Very real. And peer respites, so such as Sally's Place, like in Alameda County, is a peer respite. It's peer respites are voluntary short-term overnight programs. They provide community-based and trauma-informed and person-centered crisis supports and preventions 24 hours a day. And they're in home-like settings, in the community, voluntary. Peer respites are staffed and operated by people with lived experience within the mental health system. And they're really quite amazing. And I think we need more of those, right? Where one can come in, peer respite care, they could be 23.59 hours, right? Or they can be longer stays, 5 days or whatever it looks like. Crisis residentials are really important too, if they're an alternative to these, to the locked inpatient facilities when one can actually get clinical support. There's so many opportunities. And the importance of having someone with lived experience involved is critical, particularly for those of us, I'm saying this to myself, it was critical for me, it's an I statement, as a person, a Black person, to have someone that looks like that, that has identified and has had the journey, kind of some experience, a similar journey, to have that there to support me with really thinking about wellness, right? And how to accept some of the services that are provided. These things are really, really important. And so there's so many other alternatives that we can think about. But it doesn't have to be a locked facility. It doesn't. It does not have to be, certainly not jail. No one with a mental health disability really should, the first default should be jail, right? Or holding take where that looks like. We have to think about something different, and peer respites could be that. Crisis residentials could be.
And, like Carlean was saying, there's such a range of what mobile crisis response is. I know it is so important and for peers' voices to be heard in these budget hearings. I'll add it from my little civic engagement hat, make these hearings accessible as well so we can get in there, please. Because our voices need to be heard, like Leslie said too, and peer respites, right? Like it does not have to be involuntary. It could be voluntary, led by people with these experiences. Kiva Centers, Vesper Moore in the beginning is a great peer respite example. I also want to shout out Vanessa Green, the founder of Blackline. So if you want someone to talk to, that is another great resource as well. That's Black led. I also wanted to bring in, now that we kind of eased into the Q&A, I wanted to bring Megan back to the stage too, so she can jump in, because I'm seeing a lot of questions for this chat. We're running 5 minutes behind, but I just wanted to get to a few more of these questions with all of you here. So another question I saw in the chat was, let's see, where did I go? I just lost it. Okay, here it is. Is there a long existing police, sheriff, jail, prison, psychiatric industrial complex? I thought, Megan, you'd be good to take a stab, and I know Carlean and Leslie probably have some thoughts too.
Thank you, Jalyn. I already heard that from Carlean, which I think sort of says it all. Yes, I think when we're talking about the future of this work and community integration, we need to be looking at the interconnection that is happening between the criminal justice system, the jails, the prisons, the police, the law enforcement, and mental health. That's a lot of what we've been talking about. And, you know, I think that's as good a way to describe it as any. There is a real interconnection here. And, you know, the Bazelon Center has been bringing cases like the case in Alameda to try to get at this issue and address this problem. We have a case in Alameda County that we are doing with many of our partners, including Leslie and the Disability Rights California, to address the fact that folks are ending up in jails and prisons related to behavioral health, related to mental health behaviors. We see, for example, around the country that police are arresting people, similar to what Neli just described, but for things like disturbing the peace or loitering, when really it's just because they are in public and they are having some sort of behaviors related to their disability. So, you know, these mental health crisis teams, a mobile crisis team is one form of that. As folks have talked about, should have peers involved. It should have trained medical, mental health professionals involved. Once the police are involved, it's already escalating the matter. It's already traumatizing or re-traumatizing the person involved. And when there is no immediate threat to public safety, it just shouldn't be happening. The police should not be showing up except for the very minor, rare exceptions where there is a real imminent threat to others. And that is what is leading to this cycling. And the other piece of this is that we have so much focus on addressing the crisis instead of preventing it by providing people with community-based services, providing them with long-term services, providing them with supported employment and with housing so that they're not cycling through crisis at all. So, you know, dismantling that system is something that we are very actively involved and engaged with. I put a link into the chat to a brief that we recently authored along with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund that goes into a lot more detail about all the studies and the statistics and how do we solve this problem, which the studies have shown, you know, training officers doesn't have any proven positive impact. And in fact, in one study in Chicago found that it increased the use of force when trained officers with behavioral health training were showing up to address these issues. What we need is this alternative response. We need a mental health response. When somebody is having a diabetic episode, we send an EMT. If somebody is having a mental health episode or behaviors related to their mental health, they need a mental health response. It should not involve law enforcement at all in most cases. And also, it should be resolved on the spot so they are not then being taken to an institutional setting. In many of these instances, people can be served and assisted on the scene and then return home and connected with long-term services. So I think we also see an issue here where there is this sense of like, we need to take them somewhere and put them into some form of institutional setting. I think that needs to happen sometimes. And Leslie gave some great examples of the types of places we should be thinking about. But I also want to emphasize that a lot of the time you do not need to take them anywhere. You can help them on the scene just like you might with other medical situations, and then they can go home and choose whether or not they want to go seek additional treatment.
And if they do so, that timely access to that care is critical. And so I think it's like we really, have to really manage some other spaces too. But to have those provisions in place, we need to hear the voice of the people, like Carly said. We can show up at the budget meetings. We can go to the Board of Supervisors meetings locally or the mental health boards, whatever that looks like in your area, to the steering committees. Lend your voice. It's really, really important, because otherwise it's going to be status quo. And as we can see in California with some of this stuff, I'm just going to say it. This is Leslie Napper speaking, not just Red Cummins, but I mean, we're going backwards. We're going back to a day before, I'm feeling asylum. These are things it's how backwards we're going and how we're thinking about people living with serious mental illness, like myself, that, what are we doing here? We're going backwards and thinking that we have to have these carceral involuntary options. And that's not what we need. That's not helpful. It doesn't support our wellness journey. We will decompensate. It's going to continue this continued vicious cycle of cycling back and forth. And so enough is enough, right? And so thank you for this, Jalyn, for bringing us together to talk about it, get people excited about advocacy. And I hope that this conversation really inspires all participating to really get involved in lending your voice, that this is enough.
Thank you so much, Megan and Leslie and Carlean. I want to keep going, but I know I gotta cut us off. But I hope we can get together and chat some more, because, Leslie, the last thing you said reminded me of my talk with Neli a few days ago. In my own personal experience, the question of how did I get here? How could this have happened to me? And really, I think it's important for people to understand, this can't, people all have mental health, these type of things can really happen to anyone, especially in our Black community, especially those of us with mental disabilities. And I see a question in the chat that says, how can law students, non-attorney legal advocates help amplify the voices in their community and voices of others? I think our next section will answer something you can do pretty well. So I'll stop the Q&A for now, but I just wish we could keep going. But thank you all so much just for your time and your expertise. And yeah, I guess we will move on to our call to action portion. So with that, I will bring up, well, let's see. Today, you've learned a lot from lawyers, peer advocates, people with lived experience, and nonprofit leaders on what the problem is and what we should be doing about it. I feel like Carlean, Leslie, Neli, Megan, Jennifer painted that very clearly, very well. And not only to advocate, but center people with mental disabilities through high impact litigation, grassroots advocacy, and policy change. So today we're really pleased to share, on the 24th anniversary of this landmark decision, we have a very special guest from Senator Gillibrand's office to share what they are doing to advocate for community-based services. So I'm excited that Gil Ruiz, the legislative director of Senator Gillibrand's office, is here, and to welcome him to the stage.
Thank you so much, Jalyn. Hi, everyone. I'm Gil. I'm a 30-year-old brown Mexican-American male with short, dark brown hair. And I'm excited to be here with you to share on this important anniversary, Senator Gillibrand's Strengthening Medicaid for Serious Mental Illness Act. We've heard so much today about the rights and the vision for what Olmstead has set us up for, to not just demand, but to expect and to put forward a plan for how we get there is, now in the government's, kind of the ball's in the government's court. And there's so many great ideas out there already. The newest today that Senator Gillibrand's really proud to present is the Strengthening Medicaid for Serious Mental Illness Act. It's something that she has developed over a long period of time, with a lot of the great minds in this community, some on this very panel, we're really proud to be able to share with you today what that looks like. Let me tell you a little bit more about it. So as we all know and heard a lot about today, approximately 14 million adults in the US live with a serious mental illness. But many of these individuals who often have intense and immediate support needs do not have access to the needed mental health services and supports. In 2021, over a third of individuals with SMI did not receive any mental health treatment, and only a tiny fraction of this group received the intensive community-based services that can meet their needs. Instead, such individuals often cycle between hospitals, jails, and housing instability, or institutionalized in psychiatric hospitals, nursing facilities, or other congregate care settings. We know it does not have to be this way. Intensive community-based services for people with SMI work to help these individuals live and thrive in their own homes and communities. These services have proven track records and are the building blocks of any functioning public health system for people with SMI. However, we know the need far outstrips the supply. The Strengthening Medicaid for Serious Mental Illness Act would address the shortage of intensive community-based mental health services by creating a new 1915M Medicaid authority to provide states with an option to offer a package of services targeted specifically to individuals with SMI that includes substance use disorder. The package would include assertive community treatment, an evidence-based, highly individualized, team-based service designed to support people with the most intensive mental health needs, supported employment to help individuals get and keep a job, peer support services from individuals who have lived or living experience with mental health conditions, mobile crisis interventions teams to help de-escalate situations and link individuals to other community-based services right there in the community, intensive case management, and housing-related activities and services to support individuals with transitioning to and maintaining houses. Now, states would be required to adhere to certain standards when delivering these services. That's part of getting the money. It includes tracking the disparities in the provision of the services to ensure the services are provided with fidelity to evidence-based practices and to make sure this is getting to those who need them. And it'd pay for this all with a tiered federal medical assistant percentage, an FMAP increase up to 25% if the state opts to provide this array of intensive community-based services. So that's all a little wonky and dry, so I'll recap that a little bit. To just say, Senator Gillibrand's Strengthening Medicaid for Serious Mental Illness Act would address the shortage of high-quality, intensive community-based services for people with serious mental illness, including substance use disorder. If states don't already offer one or more of these intensive community-based services, they can apply for a planning grant to develop these services. If a state already offers these or successfully develops them and are ready to provide it, they can submit for a Medicaid 1915M waiver to increase the percentage of their FMAP to provide it under this bill, should it pass. We're really excited that we get to present it on this day and to be able to be part of this call to action. We heard so much about how Olmstead opened up possibilities for how we deliver mental health services. It really puts the onus back on government to deliver these services that it claims Americans have the rights to receive. We would agree, and we're trying to do our part here in Senator Gillibrand's office. We want to make sure these services are received in a way that's equitable and accessible and that thinks holistically about the entire person. That's what Senator Gillibrand's trying to deliver with the Strengthening Medicaid for Serious Mental Illness Act. Senator Gillibrand's been a bold and stalwart champion of disability rights in the Senate. And this is a direct response to your advocacy efforts, to your voices being raised. You've made it clear to us, to Congress, that we need to focus our attention, our resources, and direct our action on serious mental illness. So we're really proud to present this, and we hope that you can join. And today's the perfect day to come together, to commune, to excite and collaborate towards these real achievable goals in Congress. And it's simply by passing this bill. Now, How do you do that? You can reach out to our team here in Senator Gillibrand's office. Our partners at Bazelon. Come and identify yourself as a stakeholder so you can stay in touch about other opportunities to help raise your voice and formally endorse it as an individual or as an organization, and so that you can go and ask your members of Congress to support and help us pass this bill. And how does a bill become a law, right? It has to be bipartisan. To be bipartisan, we need Republicans and Democrats alike. And so we'll all need to reach across our organizations, our families, our friends, to be smart, to be intentional about our outreach and our call to action, to be unified and focused on our message and our request, which is to pass the Strengthening Medicaid for Serious Mental Illness Act. So help us build bipartisan support for this important bill. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Gil, to you, your team, and just the entire senator's office for your advocacy in this area and just your commitment to, getting the Strengthening Medicaid for Serious Mental Illness Act passed. You heard Gil's call to action, so I think that is a great thing that, not only law students and non-litigators, but everyone could definitely be able to support. Bazelon, I know for sure, looks forward to this bill becoming law. So thank you again. And with that, I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. For a quick plug, the Bazelon Center will be hosting our 50th anniversary award event on October 12th. So please save the date if you'd like to tune in virtually or join us in DC. That's a hybrid event. And yeah, please save the date if you would like to celebrate with us. And to close off the event, I thought it would make the most sense for the final words to come from one of my favorite quotes from Lois Curtis. And it's just one that I love that pushes me personally to continue to fight and do this work to support getting people out of institutions, and just continue to advocate for community-based, peer-led services like we've all been advocating for today. So my favorite quote from Lois Curtis is, she says, "Hello to all the people living in institutions. I remember you. Give me a prayer. Sometimes I feel good about my life. When I feel bad about my life, I name my country, I sing the gospel, and bring my mind back home. And I will sing with you again. Have a beautiful day. Love, Lois." So thank you all for joining. I hope, like Lois says, you all have a beautiful day. And yes, please stay in touch and reach out to us at Bazelon Center. And I'm sure if you would like to keep in touch with us as speakers, feel free to email communications@bazelon.org and I'll try to facilitate connections. So thank you and have a beautiful day.